When we were colonies of Great Britain, and the Parliament and the King wanted to raise money, they had some ingenious ways of doing it. And one of the laws that the Parliament enacted that it imposed on the colonies was the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act required that every piece of paper in your possession, every official piece of paper, a book, a pamphlet, a mortgage, a deed, even a poster you were going to nail to a tree, had to bear the King's stamp. You had to go to a post office-like facility operated by British soldiers and buy stamps from them in order for your papers to be official. Question: how did the King and the Parliament know 3,000 miles away if colonists had the King's stamps on their papers? Answer: something called the Writs of Assistance Act. This permitted British soldiers under the authority of the King and the Parliament to write their own search warrants, to show up at your home and knock on the door and hand you a piece of paper that they had written authorizing themselves to enter your property, ostensibly to look for the stamps. Of course, if they also found rum from the islands without a tax stamp, they'd seize the rum and arrest you. If they found furniture from another colony and you couldn't prove that you paid taxes on that, they'd seize the furniture and arrest you. We all know what happened. We fought a revolution. We wrote a constitution. In the debate over the Constitution in the summer of 1787, there were basically two camps. There were the big government guys, Adams and Hamilton, and there was Jefferson and Madison. Adams and Hamilton argued that our liberties came from the consent of the governed, that we allowed each other to have liberty. And because we allowed each other to have liberty, the Constitution should reflect that. Jefferson, who wasn't present that summer, but his ideas were, and Madison argued that that was absurd. Our liberties come from our humanity. We are born free. Freedom is the natural state of all human beings. The yearnings for freedom don't come from the government or from the consent of the governed. They come from the God who created us in his own image and likeness. At least on paper, Jefferson and Madison carried the day, because in the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, we wrote, the right to privacy, described by Justice Louis Brandeis as the greatest right there is, the right to be left alone. When the government wants a target, government target, no matter how widespread is the belief in the guilt of the target, no matter how accurate is the belief in the guilt of the target, no matter how actually guilty the target is, for the government to get to the target, it has to go through a neutral magistrate. That's called probable cause. That's the right to privacy. The government in this country can't write its own search warrants and bang down doors in the middle of the night. It must go through a neutral judge first. That is the unique character of the American Constitution, which at the moment of its adoption was the greatest political achievement in the history of the Western world. Unfortunately, that achievement would be attacked before the ink was dry. In the Adams administration, the government enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it a crime to criticize the president. A crime to criticize? Wait a minute. Didn't we just fight a revolution 10 years ago? A crime to criticize the president, members of the cabinet, and members of Congress. Note who was left out. He was the vice president. He was not one of them. He was one of us, like Ron Paul. They didn't care if he was criticized, and neither did he. But of course, when he became president, he allowed the Alien and Sedition Acts to expire. During the Civil War, which was the greatest violation of human freedom in the history of this country, Abraham Lincoln arrested newspaper publishers, arrested a Republican congressman. I could talk all night about the Clement Vallandigham case, suspended the writ of habeas corpus, sent his soldiers and agents to destroy property and rape women and kill innocent humans. Sherman is lauded because he burnt Atlanta and half of Georgia and South Carolina to the ground under the authority of Abraham Lincoln, but it was wartime and people in the North accepted it. During World War I, the Espionage Acts were enacted, and 1,600 Eastern European Jews from Boston to Baltimore were locked up without trial. You know what they called them? Anarchists. Today they call them enemy combatants, but at the time they called them anarchists. Some of them served lengthy jail terms because it was a crime to dissuade someone from going to work if they worked in a munitions plant. It was a crime to encourage anyone, notice the words, dissuade, encourage. Remember the First Amendment? It was a crime to encourage anyone to go on strike who worked in a munitions plant. In a famous case called Gitlow against New York, Gitlow dropped pamphlets out of a tenement on the Lower East Side that were written in Yiddish, and they sent him to jail for violating the Espionage Act of 1917. The government prosecutors didn't even know what he had said because of disputes among certain Talmudic scholars at the trial as to what the Yiddish words meant when translated into English. It's funny now, but Mr. Gitlow died in jail because of what he wrote in Yiddish on a couple of pamphlets he threw out of a tenement building in Lower Manhattan. In 1977, under the presidency of Jimmy Carter, the government enacted the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known very well today as FISA. And this act permitted the government to go to a super secret court that meets in the basement of the Justice Department. There are 3 basements to the Justice Department. FISA meets in the lowest of the 3. It's about 65 feet below the street level. And remember probable cause in order to get a search warrant? Well, if you go to FISA, you don't have to show probable cause of criminal activity, which you do when the government wants to get to its target. You only need show probable cause that the person whose phone calls you want to listen to or papers through which you want to rummage is a foreign agent. It could be an agent of a friendly country like Great Britain or Italy, or it could be an agent of an unfriendly country like China or Cuba or North Korea. As long as the target is a foreign agent and you have probable cause that the human being is a foreign agent, the FISA court will give you a search warrant. Now, why do I say the FISA court will give you a search warrant? Because the last time we checked the numbers of over 19,000 requests since 1977, 5 were denied. All the other requests for these search warrants were granted. But even Carter, to his credit, insisted that because evidence obtained under FISA was not consistent with the Fourth Amendment, because there was only a showing of probable cause of foreign agency, not probable cause of a crime, that the evidence obtained from executing one of these FISA warrants could not be used to prosecute the target. So, as an example, if the janitor in the Russian embassy is really a KGB agent who beats his wife, he could not be prosecuted for wife beating, and he could not be prosecuted for spying because that information was obtained extra-constitutionally. He could only be deported and sent back to the Soviet Union. That was the FISA statute. Wrong because it weakened the protections of the Fourth Amendment.